The Bear Roar Special Edition series, Bandwidth, serves as a platform to celebrate the people and stories of Dan's book, Bandwidth, the Untold Story of Ambition, Deception, and Innovation that shaped the internet age and the dot-com boom. The story covers the epic journey of the creation of the internet backbones, the building of the early competitive fiber networks in the 1990s, the bandwidth boom, bust, and resurrection, ending in 2020 when Dan's company, Zayo, was sold. The book is available for pre-order on Amazon and Barnes & Noble with a February 2025 release date. Head to dan-caruso.com/book for more details. In this episode of The Bear Roars, Dan is joined by Neil Hobbs, partner at L5 Capital Partners and chairman of euNetworks, and Brady Rafuse, CEO of euNetworks, two telecom leaders with careers spanning both sides of the Atlantic. From their early days driving innovation in the UK at British Telecom to making their mark in the US at Level 3, Neil and Brady have been instrumental in shaping the telecom landscape. They share stories of navigating the telecom boom and bust, from the failed BT and MCI merger to leading Level 3's customer-focused operations and building global digital infrastructure. This episode dives into their cross-continental journeys, lessons learned from transformative projects, and their visions for the future of connectivity in Europe, the US, and beyond. Let's poke the bear to kick off the conversation.
So Neil Hobbs and Brady Rafuse, this is a talk I've been looking forward to ever since I shot you guys an email about a month ago and said I would love to have you guys on a podcast to kind of share some of our memories of what happened over these crazy last 30 years. And why don't we start with when the two of you met? Like, how did you guys meet? Where did you meet? What was going on in the world of bandwidth back then?
So you want me to go first? So I joined BT when I was, British Telecom that is, when I was 29. And I'm 65 now, which is really depressing in a lot of respects.
How about it?
And I met Brady in my first or second day in BT, and I joined BT to run one of their sales and marketing groups. And I met Brady, which is, 36 years ago, Brady. And we've known each other and worked with each other for that whole time. So Brady was working in a different group at that point and then joined my group. And then he and I have had careers where we've really been working with each other for nearly the whole of the time.
So is this, year-wise, is this what, around 1990? Is that about right?
No. 88?
Late 1980s.
But then, Brady?
Maybe a bit later. Maybe 90. But
Maybe 90. Something about that.
You got to remember now, we're men of a certain age. So if you ever think how long ago something was, double it. Now you've got to double it and add the pandemic. So I think it was probably 90-ish, because I think I joined BT in 86 as a clerical officer in billing. And at that point, I met Neil. I was working in banking sector for Andrew Crouch's dad, who was one of Neil's peers at the time. And I met Neil. And then we worked through, we did banking together, petrochemicals, pharmaceuticals, communications.
And when you said you did those things together, it was all in the context of being in the communication industry, correct?
Oh, yeah. Then it was all working for British Telecom, Dan. And then, we moved up the organization. And it's interesting when you go back to your book and reading your book, which I think is, a really good eye-opener to what actually happened in some of those escapades that we all lived. And I come into it, and Brady came into it really when the BT and MCI deal fell through, which was
the BT and MCI deal was Concert. So there was
correct.
So Concert was already formed. There was a partnership between BT and MCI,
right,
where MCI had a 20% ownership stake. When were you guys involved with it? while MCI had the 20% ownership involved in Concert, or were you still at BT in those years where Concert was active with MCI?
We were still at BT when the MCI one was on, but specifically at the time I was selling mostly to pharmaceutical companies who were all installing SAP, and we had a global frame relay product that we joint marketed with MCI. So we worked closely with the MCI salespeople on those. But obviously that marriage didn't come to pass, and the torch passed to AT&T and BT, of which Neil played a massive part in pulling that together.
Okay, well, let's come to that in a second. But what was the environment like in Europe, the UK specifically in Europe, as AT&T broke apart here, the baby bells were formed here, competition began, new types of regulation kind of progressed, starting with the ability to connect directly to long distance carriers and bypass the bell companies to the ability to provide a full suite of voice services. The internet started to come on the scene. How was it from the vantage point of UK and Europe as the really 1990s were playing their way out?
Even today, you and I have had this conversation before, but there was not a day when I was in euNetworks where someone didn't phone up from my shareholders, who happen to be your shareholders as well, saying, "What are you doing with 5G?" And I'm like, seriously, people here are still moaning what they paid for 3G licenses. The market wasn't regulated the way it was in the States, local, long distance, etc. is all just one thing. Each market was massively, massively dominated by the PTT, the public telephone operator, BT in the UK, France Telecom, German Telecom, etc., etc. And these guys would have had market shares of north of 90% and would have been regulated in a specific way that you would have new entrants come in who would be given the opportunity to sell at a significantly lower cost than BT, because the BT cost would be regulated, etc., etc. And that's how they chose to introduce competition. You then have cable companies, etc., etc. A lot less developed in the UK than it was in Germany specifically. But the most important thing was the power of the PTT in each of the geographies.
And the regulator. So the regulatory environment across Europe was different in each country. And even today, the large PTTs are still dominant in each one of the countries, unlike the States. There was competition, people like Cable and Wireless taking long distance and private line and stuff. But there's a lot of people, cable companies made a big entrance more at that time. But what we were doing at BT, the chairman at the time was Ian Valence, who's pretty visionary. They realised that if you're in BT and you're the largest, PTT provider of telecom and associated services, but basically the UK is a small market. So to take a larger share of that market, you actually had to get some collaboration with other countries around the world to try to take the Fortune 500 customer base and sell services to them. So that's where we got our expertise with large customers, looking after them, sales, marketing, service, providing network for them. And that's what BT really took as a differentiator. Now, it didn't work like it didn't work in most places, but that was the theory behind it.
Yeah, and you guys were still in the UK. You guys were still reeling from the British Empire no longer dominating the entire world. So you saw telecom as another opportunity to take over the world. Is that correct?
No, Dan, the Scots have always ruled the world, mate. I mean, that's a fallacy of anything.
We worked in B2B exclusively. I mean, when I first started, I was doing B2C billing, but all of my life was in B2B, and we were very, very noisy people. But the truth was, BT's real estate was the residential market. and they somehow managed to miss the internet to the extent that a guy put a CD next to a checkout till in an electrical retailer and got to number one ISP in the UK. And BT have now merged.
Who was that, Brady? Who was the?
That was Dixon. That was Dixon's. The name of this is John Clitheroe was the guy who did that. But it never really grasped the internet, and it would be like separate business. It never saw it. And then mobile, they ended up paying so much for the 3G license that they ended up selling off their mobile company, which they're now back in with EE. But it was BT did some interesting things during that period.
Okay, so now you're watching what's happening in the U.S. You see MCI form as a competitor to AT&T, and a partnership emerges between BT and MCI that is named Concert. When did you guys first get involved in Concert?
We were involved with all the people that ran it. It was based out in Reston, North Virginia, so we were across a lot. We had a lot of the customers that they were trying to sell services to around the world. And it was always a vision of BT's. It wasn't a vision of MCI's. And really the problem was always you had to deliver services through a third party that we all had joint ventures with around the world. So it wasn't you really delivering a consistent service, even though they were meant to. It wasn't. Mm-hmm. And the problem with, as we now know from Fortune 500 companies, they want to see consistency around the world the same way, same time, same call center, same everything else. So everybody struggled with it. And there was a cultural difference with MCI and BT as well. You know, we were much more conservative and staid, probably is the best description. Came a lot from the leadership. And they didn't really grasp international services the same way we did. So there was always a fight over customers and who has the customer and who's got control of the customer. How do we deliver seamless service? How do we deliver a seamless platform that, you know, Fortune 500 companies can buy from? So it was difficult. I mean, obviously the answer to that BT came up with was let's buy MCI.
Yeah, so it was strategically, it seemed to make sense. You're going to take MCI, which is challenging AT&T, BT, which is used to operating on the global stage. You're going to bring them together and make it easier for large international enterprise customers to buy a full package of services where the hard work of pulling that together would be this organization Concert. So in theory, that sounded like a good idea. In practice, you know, it's hard. So
really hard.
But as part of that, BT ends up owning 20% of MCI.
Yeah.
So, and then in their ownership of 20% of MCI, they then see an opportunity to buy all of MCI.
Yeah.
So what was your guys' visibility as that was playing out? Were you guys close to that? Was it happening, but you know, you were doing your own thing and not really paying attention? Where were you when this drama of BT is going to buy MCI, and then that begins to unravel?
Neil was much more proximate to than I was. But we always had a maxim is we don't celebrate deals until deals are done. We certainly don't buy new head offices in Mayfair, appoint new boards, do everything that BT did. I mean, it was like the chief executive moved up, brought in a chief executive below him, and you're like, yeah, we haven't even got regulatory approval for this yet. So it did, and obviously the characters around MCI. I mean, I saw it from the shop floor because I could see the massive cultural differences between the two organizations. You know, to Neil's point, we understood international business, not because we're smarter than anybody else, but we live on a very small island. And there comes a point at which you can't sell anymore to those people on that island. So you better try and find somewhere to sell it out. Whereas your average MCI account team, nothing to do with their talent, but they just sold 10% more in America. It was a hell of a lot easier than trying to sell a global frame and relay network. So there was always a bit of a disconnect from that respect. Neil, I'll leave to you for more of a...
Yeah, I mean, I was actively involved with them, Dan. And you could see the cultural differences were enormous. The other part is that we were pulling together a company for the existing products and services that were in the market, not for the ones that were emerging and where the market was going to go. And because now, certainly BT could not afford, one of the reasons they missed the internet was that the power of the operating units didn't want to lose the revenues we got from the PSTN. And we'd had to cannibalize that. And, it's very difficult to cannibalize your existing revenue stream when you're looking at how things are developing out in the future. And we didn't do that. And that was the same with MCI. They wanted to move quicker than we did. But we took caution because we understood the customers and the multinational a bit better than them. AT&T understood them as well, but they were more like us. I'm sure we'll get to that. But it was a cultural match that was never going to work. And in the background, MCI were negotiating a deal behind our back with WorldCom.
Well, the way it was written up in the press was that MCI reported some bad numbers, causing BT to say, hey, we're going to need to renegotiate this deal. Now, this is deep into the process of a definitive agreement already being signed, going through the regulatory approval process, both sides preparing for what looked like an inevitable combination. But now MCI posts some bad numbers, and BT comes back and says, we're going to have to recut this deal. So the price gets lowered by BT. Now it looks like the deal is going to be on track again, but now it has to go back to a shareholder vote for MCI.
Yeah.
And in comes, our good friend, quote unquote, Bernie Evers from WorldCom. So Bernie Evers comes in, sees an opening, and decides that he's going to lob in a competitive bid to top BT's bid and try to buy MCI.
That's all true. But we also believe they were negotiating before then with WorldCom, irrelevant of the deal they had with us.
And again, a real, striking cultural difference.
So in comes this guy, Bernie Evers, who is a storied figure in the industry. At that point, he had already emerged as kind of a major force in the industry, and he was looking to gobble up the number 2 long-distance provider in the U.S., with WorldCom being number 4. And together, he saw a path toward combining and challenging AT&T. But the deal was already in place between BT and MCI. So he had to come in and make a hostile offer, top the bid, and make the case that his price, his commercial terms, were better than what BT is offering. And as a public company, MCI was required to consider this alternative bid. So as you guys are sitting there from still a BT standpoint, because you're not formally part of Concert at this point, what's the reaction on the ground? Did you even care?
Well, as I said before, culturally, the two companies were so different. The two races are so different. And, BT really hadn't done anything in terms of M&A of any substance for a long time, not of great consequence. It's supposed to be a completely transformational business and completely, we had an American business, but it was a very, very small business. And the question we always had all the time was, culturally, how is this going to work? And, culture is important in companies. So from where I sat, it was like, it is what it is. I mean, I could spend hours crying my eyes out about it. When the next partner came along, the cultural fit was way better. And, the story of Bernie Evers and how he goes about business, etc., went on to take all sorts of turns.
But how that affected you guys was Bernie came in. There was this battle that went on between BT, WorldCom, and another U.S. company called GTE. All that plays out, which we won't get into. But WorldCom ends up buying MCI, which then leads to BT being able to sell its 20% position, MCI to WorldCom, and then MCI and WorldCom no longer being part of this concert joint venture. So now we have kind of a seat at the table in concert that's open, and BT gets together with someone who's a better cultural fit, which is AT&T. So why don't you guys take over the story from there, because that's when you guys start playing a more prominent role.
Just to finish off, yes, Dan, just to finish off that, we wanted something to happen. Everything BT wanted something to happen. If you were in the business to business group selling to large corporates, we didn't have the product set, we didn't have the reach or the geographic control to be able to sell to. Most of those companies at that time were American multinationals. They were much stronger than MDLs. So getting to the States was an important part of the strategy. And when that fell through, it was a disappointment to everyone because we wouldn't have the products and services to be able to match anybody else that was selling on that platform. Then that's where we come into the picture much more strongly. Then Mike Armstrong obviously takes over AT&T. Mm-hmm. And he's got a relationship from his IBM days with Ian Valens.
Okay.
He's looking to do something different as well, but it still wasn't his major push. His major push was still in cable in the US, but he realized for the corporate strategy, he had to get something for their large customers. So he does a deal with Ian Valens to do Concert 2, which is basically a 50-50 joint venture, of which we both put in, let's call it 100 top customers. And that Concert would own the networks and the relationships with all of the different organizations that represented us locally in different markets around the world. And we combine those organizations to do a joint company called Concert, which would be probably one of the biggest startups in history. I think the revenue at that time was about $7 billion, which was huge at that time, putting those customers together. Plus with all the correspondent relationships, and everything else that was really internationally traveled, whatever the technology was on, was what Concert would be.
And there really wasn't, other than maybe cable and wireless, there really wasn't a provider of international services that had control of their own network and the reach that the combined AT&T and BT had. So this truly was a unique entity in a globally significant way.
Yeah. So I was put in charge of the integration team for BT and AT&T, and it was
that must have been fun.
Oh, that was heaven. And I was also part of the negotiating team doing the deal. The deal actually was complicated. It took us 18 months to pull together, but it wasn't that difficult. The difficult part was BT was willing to give up their share of those 100 customers because Ian demanded it. The guy in charge of it in BT was a guy called Peter McLeod. He wanted to do it and mandated it through the BT organization. So I got to pick what I wanted and the people I wanted. AT&T, Mike Armstrong didn't have that level of control through his operations, and they didn't want to part with a lot of those revenue streams or customers because Concert was offering a combined service, both US domestic, UK and European domestic, and around the world, and a combined series of products, services, pricing, regulation, all the things that everybody found as a real problem. One-stop shop customer service, one knock to handle. It was really quite revolutionary at the time. So I was given the job of being part of that team and then being in charge of the integration. Mm-hmm. And whereas we thought it was a good cultural fit, the big problem we had was the leadership both within BT and AT&T. And I went in front of the European Commission and was described by them as two dinosaurs mating. And it was very difficult. It was much easier in BT, but it was very difficult to get those senior managers in both the companies to part with what they wanted. We then brought on Dave Dorman as chief executive.
Yep.
And they had interviewed Dave before for the Consort job before, but he didn't take it.
And Dave Dorman at the time was where before was he part of AT&T at that point?
He came from Sprint.
Okay.
And then went into private equity. Very talented, very gifted, very charismatic. And of course, he subsequently went on after the deal, after the whole company fell through, after we ran it. He went on to be chairman and chief executive of AT&T.
Yeah, after they went through quite the story that we'll get into in another forum. But Dorman eventually took over for Armstrong and was really the last CEO of the original AT&T.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're working through bringing them together. There's these cultural challenges. I imagine AT&T, as you said, really had trouble letting go control and ownership of their top 100 customers.
Yeah.
So you had that to deal with. It sounded like it might have been a little bit more straightforward on the BT side. Did it ever really get off the ground? How far did it get before the forces of the bureaucracies being unable to come together before they had to tear that apart?
I always felt that at the point of conception, the parents were deeply in love, and at the time of birth, they hated each other. And Mike Armstrong had taken AT&T in a completely different direction. I can't really remember the name of the companies they bought, but it was like, wow. And then there were all sorts of agreements in terms of networks which are getting handled in, how the depreciation would be handled, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But both parents, to some extent or other, started strangling the company from birth, because where you had in BT.
Let me jump in for a second here, Brady. Let's talk a little more about what Armstrong was doing. So when Armstrong enters the scene at AT&T, AT&T is still largely just a long distance company. They made some moves into computer services that didn't work out and they had to extract themselves from.
Yeah.
They did get into a wireless business. So they had one of the leading wireless mobile platforms in the early era of it. But when it came to providing communication services for business, it was really just the old long distance services. So he had to think of, what do I need to do? And he came up with a plan that was a plan that if you took the best from McKinsey, the best from Boston Consulting Group, the best from Booz Allen, and they said, here's what you should do, it was a perfect playbook. It was, okay, you need to acquire one of the biggest local fiber providers, and he acquired Teleport. You need to acquire and become the biggest cable TV company. This way you'll be able to serve residential. So he becomes the biggest cable TV company through a couple large acquisitions, including TCI. And they said that, and you need to become the biggest wireless company. So he took what they had and added to it and became the biggest wireless company. Then lastly, they said, you need to have an international strategy. You're AT&T, you need to have an international strategy. And the answer for that was Consort. So he's doing all these gigantic transformations all at the same time. And I didn't even add to that. And you need a new long distance fiber network. And don't go work with one of your kind of emerging rivals. Go figure out a way to build the fiber separate from them. So they do 3 partnerships with 3 upstarts to build a massive fiber network throughout the U.S. So all this is going on, and Consort gets becomes the answer to the question of what's your international strategy.
And it was clear when we were negotiating with them, Dan, that this was our major corporate focus, and it was one of 4 or 5 for them.
Yeah.
And in essence, we dedicated all of our time and effort into doing this, and their corporate people, especially their strategy teams, were stretched unbelievably, which allowed us to negotiate better terms than we should have been able to.
Gotcha. So what happened to that Consort venture? What happened to this this idea of Concert being a vehicle for BT and AT&T to have a 50-50 partnership to, dominate the international communications of the world.
Well, I'll give you an idea. I'll let BD speak to the exact amount, but I ended up working for Dorman, running those 100 customers, both sales, marketing, service, everything else that went with it. And Brady was in charge of winning new business, bringing those customers on board, and they loved it. So Brady, what was the value of deals that you signed in the first 12 months?
$8 billion of contract value in 10 months, was it? Again, so maybe 20 months at the pandemic. But it was to your point about did it get off the ground, the bit that Neil ran, global accounts, got way off the ground. Customers absolutely loved it. There was a lot of swan's legs flapping around under the water, but just the idea that you could have a global purchasing entity that would give a worldwide mobile contract, global frame relay contract. Yeah, I mean, we put this service and contracting wrap that customers absolutely adored, and we had contracts coming out of our ears and genuinely had a pretty good delivery mechanism for dealing with it as well. Like I say, lots of swan's legs flapping around under the water, but it was, global account concept absolutely exhilarating. Now, the carrier services and correspondent minutes and stuff side of the business, I think, was pretty close to torture.
Yeah.
Global networks was impossible because you were trying to deal with two parents who just had no interest at all in.
Plus a bunch of other networks in other countries.
They were actually easier, Dan.
Oh, really?
To deal with, yeah.
Wow.
But the interesting part was, and it's a lesson that, we've learned through our working life, and we'll go into level 3 and we learned it there as well, is that the people that worked in concert largely worked really well with each other. BT was better, but AT&T, the management at AT&T spent their time trying to undermine concert. They didn't want it to succeed.
Yep.
And Don found that.
And eventually it didn't succeed. They had to unwind it.
Correct.
So is this, when you were signing up these contracts, Brady, would that have been right around the year 2000? 1999?
99, maybe the latter part of 88, but definitely 99 and into 2000. Neil, you left June?
Yeah.
July 2000, something like that.
So this is now approaching the height of the .com boom, the telecom boom. We're right in the approaching kind of the peak point, and concerts gets off to a good start, at least on the commercial side. Hard to get everything to work, but there's not harmony between AT&T and concert. And how does that play out?
And it was losing a lot of money. It was losing a lot of money, Dan, and both of the parents were hurting domestically. They were starting to hurt domestically. Yeah. And with not the will and the willpower to make it work, and certainly not getting the buy-in from the parents that was needed, it started to collapse. That was at that point I left and joined level 3, and Brady came quite quickly after me.
Yeah, no, that's where our paths are crossed. So you guys leave there, and who left there before you, Neil, and joined level 3? Because you weren't the first person from this group.
So Lee Job, who was a colleague of mine, he was running networks and operations out of Bermuda because we put it there for tax reasons.
Yep.
And he knew, I think, Van McAtee from days of old at GM or something.
Okay.
And level 3 recruited Lee Job to come in to run, most things, I guess. Dan, I can't remember.
Yeah, what was his understanding of what he was brought in to do? Because my memory is everything reported to him, and he reported to Kevin.
Yeah.
Outside of him might have been strategy and finance, but everything that had to do with the business almost reported to him first and then reported to, Kevin, who really didn't have any other direct reports that I can think of, who then reported to Crow. Was the understanding that, Kevin would be moving up to CEO and Lee would be moving up to COO, but they wanted a period of time to go by first. Do you have any recollection of that?
I think that was what he perceived was going to happen. Yeah. And Lee, as we know, had a lot of personal problems. We didn't fully understand what they were at the time.
Yep.
And he approached me to join Level 3, which we had started in the concert days to start evaluating what you guys were doing, especially as a tier 1 provider. We became really, because we couldn't get it, right? And AT&T wouldn't give us their tier 1 status. And that was pretty important going forward. So it became fascinating. He approached me to come and join because he said sales and marketing at Level 3 sucked. And at that point, I wasn't sure, to be honest. And then they offered me a lot of money, and that convinced me that was the right decision for me.
So you were motivated by money in those days, is what you're telling us.
Most certainly, we'd come from a large UK corporate where stock options were new, but they weren't at the same level as they were at the States. And after working with my AT&T colleagues for about 3 or 4 years and realizing how much money they were making being based in the States, it became pretty obvious to me that a move to America was what I should do.
Yep. And you're still in America this day.
America can't get rid of me.
Yeah. So Lee comes over, and at that point, this wasn't the first time or only time, but at that point, Level 3 is a complete, utter mess. I mean, everything about it's a mess. The industry's a mess because at that point, now we're on the other side of the telecom boom and we're at the meltdown stage. All hell is breaking loose. Our organization, a lot of infighting, a lot of disorganization, a lot of people being tested in ways they've never been tested before, dysfunction, lack of scalable, processes, a sales organization that kind of grew up, from kind of small startup mentality, but never matured into, a well-functioning sales organization. So pretty much everything that could be a problem in terms of the day-to-day business was a problem. And on top of that, you had kind of the industry meltdown kind of overshadowing it all. And that's when Lee joins to be part of how are we going to straighten things out on the day-to-day. And Lee turns to Neil, and Neil, what was the circumstances in which Brady then joined?
Similar to me, we'd had enough of being stuck in between AT&T and BT, and we'd put a lot of effort into it and a lot of, real passion into building something. For then watching people to destroy it because they didn't want to lose part of their empire or whatever reason they had was actually soul destroying. I mean, I didn't understand how dysfunctional Level 3 was at the time then. I soon realized it very quickly. But there was also potential there. We'll talk about the people with, but really the talent in that company, middle management was breathtaking.
Yeah.
But Neil asked me to go and join anywhere, and I joined. So let's put that right up front. But
so say it again, Brady. You would have joined anywhere that Neil went. Is that what you said?
Anywhere Neil asked me to go, I would have gone.
Okay.
It's the nature of relationships, the nature of the way it's always been. And we quite like that Butch and Sundance thing. So, but at a different point, I mean, I saw the Mosaic Brails, I sort of 93-ish, I guess it was. And I just sort of got it. I mean, life is serendipitous, and I just sort of got the internet. And I had been, to the point, it was getting to the point where people are saying, Brady, you need to stop talking and leave the room. Because I was just saying, there is a massive, massive change happening to our industry, and none of you are paying any attention to it. And even if concert was even remotely functional, it was dead in the water. It just had no chance because the nature of the internet was so different. And I've been looking at level 3 forever, and just the idea of this massive brand new fiber switchless network, it was just amazing. And then Neil said, come and join, so I thought it was brilliant. December 2000, stock prices down from 125 to 25, so I knew it was bad. But I walked in, I was like, what the actual fuck? I've never seen anything like it in my life. The most intelligent people I've ever met, just terrifyingly bright. You walk into a room like, my God, they must think I'm an idiot. And then you just watched how people behaved, and you're like, my God, if my children behave like this, I'd beat them to death. And they're like,
we deserve to be beaten to death. We were behaving like bad children, no doubt about it. So what would you guys say to each other? So that first 6 months, you're both kind of uprooted from where you were living, and you go out and have dinner and some cocktails, and you talk about this company you just joined, Level 3. Like, how would you talk about what you were observing there? What would you say? I'll say behind closed doors, but you guys are pretty good at saying the same thing straight in front of us as you were behind closed doors. But what do you remember during that period of, as you realize, holy shit, what is going on here?
So we came from a very, structured, fairly formal organization. And in some respects, it was quite thrilling for that adventure of not knowing what was happening tomorrow. The other part was, though, is that it became pretty obvious to me at the very beginning the leadership was incredibly dysfunctional. Mm-hmm. And everything was getting swung from pillar to post depending what the next idea that Jim had. And then all the attention of the company was then turned towards that. And it was obvious that the focus which we had always been brought up with, which we still think is right to this day, of how do you focus on customers? How do you understand what customers want? How do you give customers the service they want and need? And how do you integrate these new products and services? Because wavelengths didn't exist, they were just coming out, right? How do you give the customers they want? And more importantly, I remember one of the first meetings I had with you, and everybody tell me Dan's mad, Dan's this, Dan's that, right? And I remember you sat me down and said, why are we selling to these customers, Dan? They can't buy the services that we're developing. And then magically out of your pocket, you said, I've been saying for ages that these are the 200 customers we should chase. I'm like, you're the first guy that's actually got it. You're actually focusing on products, services, network, service delivery, sales, marketing. Where can we satisfy a customer base, which, by the way, is not the customer base that we have?
Yeah. Yeah, that does bring me back to memory. It was, we had the notion of, where is our big opportunity? And let's start with the customers. And let's force ourselves to break that down. Who are the top 10 customers that should matter us the most?
Yeah.
And how are we doing with them? Do we have products that serve them? Do we have relationships? And who's the next 15? Who's the next 25? And build that list kind of in a pyramid and start at the top, because those top 10 customers were 30% of the opportunity for us.
Yeah.
How are we doing with them? Are we even calling on them? And sometimes we were, sometimes we weren't.
And I mean, when I joined, what my actual job was to run European sales and marketing. And it was specifically to sell to the European PTTs in North America, which we did a pretty sweet job with. If you think back about British Telecom, France Telecom, and they were up there in our top 5 biggest customers. But in Level 3 Europe, there was 1,671 people. The biggest customer, I said, when did they last pay a bill? And I was told, look, you don't understand, you're a telco guy, you're not an IP guy. I said, yeah, but I also understand they're bankrupt, and I bet you they've never paid a bill. And then in Germany, we were building the managed modem product, which was basically a product that was founded on a regulatory quirk that existed in the United States and did not exist in Germany. What are we doing? So
and by building it, spending millions and millions and millions of dollars to build it.
Gazillions. And, people were selling it and getting paid millions in commission.
And the head of Germany was based in Switzerland.
And I think seriously, I cannot underestimate, and you can see the reach of the Level 3 alumni right across the business. And it was, an inflection point where the whole industry was cratering, and it was really difficult to know what to do. And Arsene Wenger, who used to be the manager of Arsenal, they made a Netflix documentary or something like that. He stares into the camera and he says, I know many, many champions. They talk only of their failures, never their successes. And it was a really, really dark time. But in my perspective, there was never any doubt about the brilliance. There was never any doubt about the core strategy of the business. It was transforming the world. And I think it's a great mark that how many people from that cadre went on to have huge roles in global communications industry. And
the legacy of Jim Crow's companies is mind-boggling. The talent and what people have gone on to do, including the two of you, which we're definitely going to come around to. So Lee comes, you guys follow. As you mentioned, Neil, turned out Lee had some kind of personal demons that, got the better of him. So he lasts a pretty short period of time. He lasts maybe 9 months or so, and he's all of a sudden no longer there. And now at this point, you guys have been there long enough to say, we got a lot of great assets. We've got a lot of great capabilities, but the company is very dysfunctional. Now the person who we joined to come here is no longer here. Where do we go from here? So do you recall at that point, were you thinking about leaving because of that, or was that never in the cards? Was it more about, I remember from that period of time is that's when we really got serious. That's when, we've gotten to know each other, and that's when we're like, okay, enough is enough. Jim and the strategy folks and the finance folks are taking care of kind of the structural problems with debt, et cetera. In terms of running the business, how to get that on track, my recollection at least is that, the bond that I was able to form with the two of you kind of gave me some confidence back, gave me a bigger voice, at the senior executive levels like I had once had, and people I could trust who were in areas of the business that, frankly, I didn't know all that much about, but I could trust that you were approaching things and thinking about things from a very pragmatic and responsible way. And from there is, what I view as kind of a turning point, the beginning of a turning point for Level 3 getting on track from a running the business standpoint. How was that from your guys' vantage point?
It was all a bit mad, full stop. I mean, yes, we moved from BT to Constant, but really it was the same place. We didn't have different contracts or stuff like that. It didn't feel like a big move per se. I'd never really worked anywhere before. So, like the idea of moving around and going from place to place to place, Neil had already worked in the technology business, saw that the hardware world was becoming a bit more dinosaur, saw the world of services and recurring revenue, etc. So went to BT, wanted to be in America. So the console opportunity was great. We went to Level 3. I never gave any consideration to leaving. Things were difficult, but I mean, we had more money than anyone else. We had a better network than anybody else. I was quite clear the grass was definitely not greener anywhere else. And I sure as hell didn't know anything about other than communication. So, and I liked it. It was hard work. It was some crazy times. But like I say, the people were brilliant, and customers understood what it was we were saying to them. And for the most part, because we were exclusively selling as wholesalers, there was a lot in them which was, you are the company that we want to be, and we can't be it. So help us infuse your DNA into what we do. So, I never thought about it.
No, I didn't. I mean, Lee's problems became obvious as we were going through a very short period of time. It was there, and I had no awareness of how bad they were when we worked with each other in concert, because we lived in different continents. Same as Brady. I began to really, really enjoy working with you, Kevin, Van, Surreal, the young Turks like Tench and Van Royen and all of that talent, Charles Myers. There was a whole group of real talent that was equally as frustrated as the three of us. Mm-hmm. Just wanted to go on and build something great, right? And I think that's what, I mean, I shouldn't have stayed as long as I did. That was a mistake. But certainly that was very enjoyable for me. And I was learning a lot from you guys, a lot. We were teaching you guys how to run a sales force, how to build things properly, not from a product marketing set, but from but how to base them. I mean, it's amazing to me that we had we're talking about that 100 customer list. We had no one of any talent capable of selling to large corporates on a multi-level, senior level contact base. The people, AOL was our biggest customer, and our salesperson lived in Denver. I mean, there was so many basic errors about how to structure it. So we ended up getting rid of most of the sales force, I think 93% within about 12 months, and went to recruit a group of people that had the capability to sell to the target customer list. And then you were out on the road with me, for example, a lot, visiting customers, trying to get to those customers. You were building the products and services that we needed. It was a really good time. We were much more involved in creating an exciting environment, but at the same time, the company was dysfunctional.
Yeah, but becoming less so. I mean, we were chipping away at that. I think the fact that the company really started, at least the culture of the company, the mindset of the company started to reorientate itself toward the customer, and recognizing the sales organization was the path to reorientating toward the customer. So instead of the sales organization tugging in one direction and network tugging another and product groups tugging a third, and then Jim coming up with ideas that were maybe brilliant on one level, but maybe disjointed on a bunch of different levels. Instead of that, it started to be like, okay, we're going to get together. We're going to be talking about customers. And you guys started putting in place, regular kind of customer funnel meetings that went beyond the sales organization. And it was like, how are we going to attack this customer? How are we going to attack this customer? What do they need? What can we offer them? What can we offer them that's unique? How are we going to win the key deals? Identify the deals that were the critical deals that are must win. Do we all realize what those are? And then do we all know what our parts are to go after those? And that was when we established the dark fiber groups, the metro fiber, to focus on that. I think Tench might have been involved in that at that point. Caruso involved in the city fiber. We had the wavelengths become a major product category. So we've got these different major product categories. How do those line up against each individual customer? Because some customers cared more about higher layer and some cared more about lower layer. But we started to really get the whole company kind of rallying around that. And that was transformational for me, because I've never been in an environment where that was the norm. For you guys, you've probably never been in an environment where that wasn't kind of the way you thought about things. I think that really made the company start to become more functional.
I think so. Played a big part in that as well, helping that pull that together. He wanted to
say it again.
Kevin played a large part in that as well. He wanted to make it happen. He wanted people to work better with each other, but we were still
no doubt
base and
because I think him coming off the Lee experience made him realize, hey, I've got to start, playing more of a role in kind of how we're really going to get going as a company.
Yeah,
no doubt about it. Yep. Go ahead, Brady.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things about level 3 that massively influenced the way that I thought about business was, I'm sure someone will listen to this and I'll get pelters for it, but we always used to talk about product groups in BT as golf balls and umbrellas.
Yeah.
To get them to buy dinner and give golf balls and umbrellas to customers. The power of your line of business organization, the connection between capital and the return on that capital, the spend to win, just the quality of that team was absolutely breathtaking.
Yeah.
And you always felt you could win. You take a Jeff Tench or Grant Van Rooyen or Davis. So many of the team. You take them in with you. It just used to blow customers away. And in later career jobs, you'd say to a CFO, no, you don't make decisions on capital. You can be involved in it, but the product manager makes the decision on where we spend capital. And that, I know it wasn't absolutely like that, but it was, if you brought good business to the table, it would go through. Van built a great service organization, really, really strong field services culture. It was genuinely great. If the world outside had been a bit different, it would have just felt normal, but it was amazing.
Yep. So I ended up leaving, about somewhere in the middle of that transformation period, start going off and doing different things. But you guys are still there for, a few more years. So talk about the level 3 after I left, kind of where it was going toward. Brady, the circumstances in which you then left, and that's when we started to kind of collaborate again. And then Neil, you were there for a while more after that. So the circumstances that played out, which were pretty interesting, and then eventually led to you moving on as well. So tell us, the rest of your level 3 stories.
I'll go, Neil, because I left first. So we had numerous orgs, reorgs, etc. Almost in a direct mirror of my concert time. I kept going on. The internet's changing. It used to reflect like IBM 3270. Call up head office with a question and a reply will be sent down to read, write, web 2.0, whatever you wanted to call it. And Jim and Kevin called me in and said, right, we're sick of listening to you, go build a content business. So I was running Europe, now all of Europe, rather than just a sales organization, and then creating content markets, which is pretty cool. We put NFL.com on the internet. It was, doesn't sound like anything now, but putting live sport on the internet was a pretty amazing thing to have done. And we'd then structured into 4 customer-facing groups, and Neil was basically the COO. So we had business markets where we bought a number of little local companies and rolled them up. We had my 2 units, and then we had the wholesale business. But I kept saying to Jim, Buddy, Kevin, Sunit, this isn't going to work. And they told me to go away and just do my job and individual accountability, blah, blah, blah. And my 2 units had a pretty good year in 2007. But, I flew to America 33 times in 2007. And
wow.
I was tired. My personal life was a mess. The stock price fell from 8 to 2. My business is overachieved by $60 million dollars of EBITDA, and I got a 90% bonus. And when you do those scales of justice, it was just, it's time to go. So I got home. It was February the 14th, and I remember it wasn't very romantic when I got home. And I just went and sent a note to Kevin and said, look, Kevin, I need a break. Then he said, well, I'll see you in New York next week. And I said, I'm not coming. So he flew over and saw me, 3 weeks later, Neil?
Yeah.
And then I was flying down to the Maldives the next day, and then it got really confusing even for international travelers, because by that time I was in Maldives time, Neil was in Denver time, and by the time I'd landed, Neil said Kevin had gone. And Jim said to me,
I'm sorry, say that part again.
Kevin had left. Kevin left, so this must have been March, April 2008. So February I'd said, I need a break.
And by Kevin left, you mean Kevin left
level 3
at that point? So, okay, I thought Kevin had left a couple years after you had left, but my timeline must be off.
He left almost concurrently with me.
Okay.
And then Jim had said to me and Neil, I want you to run the company. The two of you to run the company as a pair. But I just couldn't do it. I was exhausted. I felt a little bit let down, and I had other things in my life to attend to. So I was sad, but I was really proud of the 7 years that we'd done in that time. That was my story.
Gotcha. So how did you feel, Neil, with Brady leaving, with Kevin leaving? What was going through your mind at that point?
Not good. Jim and I never really got on. I had a skill set that he didn't particularly like, because he never saw customers. He didn't really understand them. He liked people that could have much bigger debates about technology and all that kind of thing with him. And I just wanted to make sure that we kept our people happy. We motivated them, and that, we'd reward the good ones, and we'd keep our customers happy, and we'd give them great service. And that didn't really make me Jim's favorite person. But I mean, I'd run the network for about a couple of years by that point, because when we go those two guys, I was in charge of, it's crazy. I'm the sales guy getting in charge of all the data centers, all the network, all that kind of stuff, the field guys, all that thing. And I loved that job. Unlike salespeople, they actually did what you asked them to do. And it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot about it. I wasn't the subject matter expert. I learned how to work with people that were the subject matter experts. And I told them what the company needed to achieve and what their role was within it. And I trusted them to get on and get the job done. But it was clear in the background there was a falling out, some kind of level of disagreement between Jim and Kevin. And eventually it came to that point. And the irony of it was it became so bad that Jim had to turn to me to try to keep everybody in order.
It wasn't too bad, because if it was far worse than that, he would have to call me up, and that's when would have been really bad.
Danny wasn't that desperate. Come on. but it was, and then basically, Buddy took the product units. I took everything else apart from finance and HR, and we got all the teams together, and we started working really well. But at the same time, we were making promises to the city about, cash we were going to generate, which stopped us investing in the network. It was a very difficult time. But we had to force some things through to make it work, and it was working. But Jim was never going to give me, I would move to Denver anyway. I refused to move. I'd already moved my family across to the States and wasn't going to make another one. And I wasn't really his kind of guy. So, he brought in somebody else, and I was quite happy at that point to go. And in hindsight, sorry?
Yeah, because he, I don't think it was that, he didn't get along with you. I think it was that, the whole idea of meeting with customers, understanding how sales are made, having to deal with situations that maybe are more gray and more ambiguous, which is, when you're selling, you got to get the other side to say yes to give you money as opposed to you giving them money, like what you do in acquisitions. And Jim just never allocated time toward that. He wanted people to do that work within his organization, but maybe 2 layers removed from him. And that just wasn't his thing. So he didn't know how it worked. He wasn't interested in how it worked.
The other part was that the company was still riddled with, you're in Jim's side, you're in Kevin's side, you're in someone else's camp. And I don't believe in that as a leadership or a management structure. Eventually the leader is accountable for the culture of the organization. And fighting between different camps is not a long-term success, and it doesn't work. And I was continually, after Kevin went, I was continually trying to bring people into the fold, and it wasn't Kevin's fault. I mean, really, Jim would swing and forward, back and forward, and it just came a point where it was difficult to really get enthused about working 15 hours a day, flying all over the world, when your boss didn't really get what you did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at that point, so Jim, turns to Jeff's story, brings Jeff's story on, or maybe Jeff was already there at some point. But Jeff turns out to be the replacement for Jim.
Yeah.
What I remember when you left, Neil, and tell me if this memory sounds right. For some reason, Brady, you were in town with Neil leaving, and the 3 of us got together. And I remember we went out. I think I drank, 3 martinis quicker than I drank 3 martinis ever in my life. And I'm like, by the time 9 o'clock hit, I thought we were going to be out till late at night. I'm like, holy shit. But I think we had a nice dinner. If I remember right, it was at Jack's Fish House there on Pearl Street. And that felt for me like a rekindling of kind of the relationships that we had, a few years prior to that. So that was a very enjoyable evening for me.
It was great. It was great. And I really, at that point, it was like, that was definitely the end of an era for all of us. We were done.
And then I made one of my bigger mistakes, because what I should have done is figure out a way to get the 2 of you on the Zayo board. And I think Zayo could have been, Zayo did well, obviously, but I think we would have done much better if somehow I could have found a way to, to align with you guys and figure out, how do we do this? And I should have had the wisdom to figure out a way to twist your guys' arms to join the board and help navigate the Zayo journey going forward. But in any case, Brady, you and I, because I think at that point you probably had time to rest and kind of regroup, and you started to think about what you were going to do next. And that's when I think we did a little bit of collaboration, if I remember right, around PST, Central Europe, even though when I grew up that was Eastern Europe, not Central Europe. But then euNetworks comes about, and it starts to look like an opportunity to do in Europe what Zayo was doing in the US. So tell us about how euNetworks kind of came about from your vantage point, and then what happened from there.
So you had an incredibly successful run with ICG, and obviously Columbia Capital were part of your team to make that happen. And during that period, you and I had stayed in touch. We just did. And I had met, when I was still in level 3, I'd met with Jim Fleming and John Siegel from Columbia. And I then left level 3, as I said, and John specifically, but Jim too, was saying, come and work with us, come and work with us. But At the time, it felt like they were looking at mobile opportunities in Bosnia. So if I was going to be in Sarajevo, I might as well be in Denver. I mean, it was. And then John Siegel phones me and says, "Oh yeah, let's do euNetworks." I'm like, "I don't know what that is." He said, "Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. It's a fiber network in Europe." I'm like, "Well, one of us works in the fucking European fiber business, and that's me, and it's not you. And I've never heard of it." And he says, "Oh, it's the old MFN networks." And you're like, "Oh wow, well that's interesting," because again, my technical knowledge is so ridiculously useless. But what I do remember is we all constructed networks in rings, and MFN constructed networks on grids, and which is why they went so spectacularly bust, because they cost a lot more to build. But latency was becoming an increasingly important thing in the communications world. So it did seem interesting. I trusted you. I'd sat alongside you at board meetings when Zayo wasn't even called Zayo, but and you very kindly shared a lot of your thoughts and thinking about where the communication industry was going. I felt exactly the same thing. Traffic doubles every year, 100 true fans, whatever it happens to be. It was just like, focus on the main thing, stop getting attracted by shiny objects, have a single source of truth. Generally at that point, I thought you and me were the only people in the world who thought data was important in relative to networks. Ran, direct copy of you, ran every single thing in Salesforce in level 3, in euNetworks. But I mean, the business I walked into was called Global. It only just had its name been renamed from Global Voice to euNetworks, which was good because it wasn't global and it didn't sell voice.
And talk a little more about the MFN history of what that company was.
Basically, MFN went quite spectacularly bust, and I'm not entirely sure of the statute of limitations or any of these things, but I know you cover it in the book. But what I saw was when it went bust, and again, whether it's true or not, whether it's apocryphal tale, one of the key point was the head office hadn't appreciated that there was more than $1.3 billion of construction commitments in MFN Germany that had not been calculated. And what it seemed to be as it went into chapter 11 and then into chapter 7 and not chapter 7, but I think it was 4.5 years in chapter 11. And obviously it becomes a big part of your story down the line, but they basically turned their back on it. And there was a guy who worked in the MFN European leadership team, a guy called Noel Meany, who was the chairman of euNetworks when I got there, had previously been the CEO. And he managed to pick up nearly all of the MFN assets across Europe, absent France, which, again, became part of your story, not my story.
And absent UK as well, or at least.
There wasn't really much in the UK per se, so it had a loop, but it was shared infrastructure for the most part. And then they'd done a deal with a company called Viatel, which was a shared network, which again was part of your story more than mine. So yeah, I mean, it was 20-ish million of revenue. 12 or 13 million of that came from a data center in Amsterdam. When I went there, it was like it had subsistence. I'm like, we have a data center rolling down the hill in the flattest city in the world. What more are you going to introduce me to in this company? So I
what do you mean rolling down the hill?
It's subsistence. It was, like their view of a wet and hot and cold aisles was the cold aisles are the ones where the buckets were taking the water that was coming through the roof. It was an interesting time. I relied very deeply on my friendship with Neil and to yourself as well, where I'm like, borderline suicidal every single day. As I say to people, 13 different people cried in my office in the first 9 months of being there, not including me, every day. So it was an interesting. But according to John Siegel, it was going to be like shooting fish in a barrel.
Yeah, and the story ended up really well. So it started out with maybe a lot of what did we get ourselves into. I was an investor, so I actually wrote checks into the euNetworks deal. Neil, after leaving Level 3, I think you joined the board, right, Neil, of euNetworks, if I remember right. Yeah. But you went from Brady, a starting point of okay, maybe it was a good entry valuation, but this thing is a lot of work. What did you do with euNetworks? How did that story play out, and how does it continue to play out?
That to me or to Neil?
That's to you, Brady. This is euNetworks is you.
Well, we did. And by the way, Neil's arrival on the board was probably as the most significant thing that happened, because you'll recall that when Columbia bought in, it bought a certain percentage of the business, but the existing shareholders were there. The company had 2 convertible notes, it was going to the wall at a very high speed. And Columbia could have thought, okay, we'll let this go into bankruptcy and see what we can pick up out of bankruptcy. But they chose not to. And you know what those guys are like. And that wasn't a fiscal decision. It was, what about the customers? What about the people? And that was important. But, trying to get people aligned around the Warren Buffett point, if you've got a business that consumes a lot of capital but at great returns, then that is a compounding machine, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing. And a lot of people who invested in the business did not appreciate that and did not appreciate the capital needs of the business. Neil came on as chair, helped massively with allowing me to concentrate on doing my job and not having to spend my time constantly on internetine battles. And we're all friends now, but they made a lot of money. But, we weren't. When I did my last all hands, I was like, thank you for the last 14 years. They've been absolutely fantastic, except for the first 12, which was shit. And it was hard. But I'd lived through that period in Level 3 with the IP business. Traffic doubles every year. Seen what happened in the content revolution, had the great honor and pleasure of watching you and listening to you. And back in the day, you used to write Bear on Business.
And you were quite the blogger as well in those days.
It's a little less cerebral, but and we just concentrated. And it was like, look, it was a bit like when I joined Level 3 Europe, all the salespeople said, we can't sell optical services, we're going to have to sell electrical services. And I said, well, we're not going to sell electrical services. So we'll just wait until the customers come, because I'm telling you, they're coming. And we then absolutely focused on having 100 true fans. And the only reason we said 100, because it was too unpalatable for the board to hear 10.
Which really,
yeah, exactly. And then we went studiously about connecting every data center in Western Europe, north, south, east, west, with thick, dark fiber, single source of truth, one inventory system. We would be able to install a service before most of our competitors could produce a PDF for it. And it was genuinely because we focused with so much discipline on that. And it was like, not because we were smarter than anybody else, because that's definitely not the case. But, when you make mistakes, you really want to hope you don't make the same mistake twice. And what I saw in Level 3, specifically, a bit when we did the Wiltel deal, but particularly when we did all those businesses that went into business markets, our portfolio became so large and I remember going to a meeting, 4-hour meeting with product groups. We had 27 incremental upgrades to the voice platform and cancelled Ethernet. And you're like, why am I the only person who thinks this is crazy?
Yeah. Going from 3 service to tier 1 service, which is a huge mistake for us.
Yeah. So we sold dark fiber wavelengths and Ethernet was genuinely a point-to-point entry-level service. We had some stuff in Germany where it was some, corporate business. We bought a company called LambdaNet there, which was complex. And, but we hived off the businesses we didn't want. And we just stuck to our knitting. And it took a long time. We had a lot of supportive shareholders. In 2018, we sold a significant part of the business to Stonepeak Partners. And then
actually, let's take a pause before we get to selling to Stonepeak, because 2012 comes along. So by 2012, you both were in. You had been in euNetworks for a little while there, Brady. By that point, Neil, it might have been about the time you were joining, left Level 3, joining the board, chairman of euNetworks, and then I buy AboveNet, which was the MFN. Successor, MFN, post-bankruptcy changed its name to AboveNet. And AboveNet, what came along with it was a significant business in the UK with a deep penetration, in particular the financial services and kind of related industries, where a lot of customer solutions that span, at a minimum, UK and the US, but they also began to take advantage of the other assets that still remained within AboveNet in other parts of Europe. It was pretty nascent, but there was some fiber in this market and that market that they had started. Either they kept from bankruptcy, or perhaps they picked up post bankruptcy, but they had kind of a skeleton network in other parts of Europe, and that's when the question was then, should we, Zayo, take our new assets in Europe, figure out a way to put that together with Brady's EU network, and we stay focused on the U.S. because we weren't in Canada at the time in any meaningful way. We stay focused on the U.S. and we align through euNetworks by putting a significant portion of our assets into euNetworks. I think our Europe business, most of the revenue being UK-based, was probably similar in size to euNetworks at that point, give or take, some kind of at least in the same, ballpark. I don't know what was bigger, smaller, but it wasn't, one was, a lot bigger than the other. They were in the same zip code. Or the other alternative was, can we find a way to take euNetworks and make it part of Zayo? Now, I wasn't ready to let go of what we just acquired in Europe, and you certainly weren't ready to kind of roll euNetworks into Zayo. So we ended up then becoming rivals, which, I liked it better when we were collaborators than when we were rivals. Friendly rivalry, but rivalry nonetheless. How did that whole circumstance play out from your vantage point?
It was complicated. I don't ever want a deal which doesn't have industrial logic. I don't care if it's got the best financial picture that sits behind it. If it doesn't have the industrial logic, then it's not worth doing. This had the industrial logic. But it then comes down to, is everybody want to dance at the same time? You may want to have a dance, but people might not want to dance with you. And from my perspective, you and Jim, there was a little bit of DNA that came from Jim there. That you've never had anything that you didn't want to keep, and you knew it was important, and it wasn't obvious that saying goodbye to that was the best long-term interest of Zayo shareholders. No, I understood that. I got that. And at the end of the day, there wasn't a lot of deals being done in the telco business that gave credence to the forward value of revenues. And let's not forget, when we started out on these journeys, you and I and Colby Sinosal, I was very much at the bottom of that chain, coined the term communications infrastructure and bandwidth infrastructure, and we gave it all sorts of intellectual nonsense. But the truth was, we wanted multiples like data centers and power.
Yes.
Well,
that was Jim Fleming's solution to everything. Dan, Brady, why don't you just get your businesses to trade like the tower companies? They trade at like 25 times EBITDA. If you could just get that to happen, don't you think that'd be a good idea? He's like, yeah, Jim Fleming, that's a great idea. How do you want us to make that happen again? But we did a pretty good job of.
Happened in 2024, baby.
Yes, it did.
But there was a logic. The logic was always there. But you know what it's like with deals. That you can analyze it, you can do this, but it's always about price. You sit down and say, okay, this is the price, and then you imbue it every single day. Well, they're culturally aligned. This is aligned, and then you do a post review. It came down to price, and I don't think we ever found a right way to value each other's businesses. I can't remember exactly when you got the Viatel business. You bought Neo in France, which was, I desperately craved that business, and then Geo in London, which in the UK again, I desperately craved. We had no ability to compete with your machine at that point. But we had a broader reach, and that was the thing that helped us with the, those 10 true fans we were looking for.
Yeah. And then, then we went public. So now it's 2014. We go public, and between what you were doing in Europe, and both you in Europe and me in the US, were promoting our businesses, which is a smart thing to do, right? We're kind of promoting our business because we have to raise money. We have to, get a fair reflection of value in the businesses that we had. So we're pretty much, sharing our playbook, widely to whoever was wanting to listen. But unfortunately, I guess fortunately for both of us, because they turned into really good exits as well. But in terms of prosecuting the business, we then unleashed these fierce animals called infrastructure funds, and in the U.S. tower companies, who looked at what we're doing and say, I want a bit of that action, and I've got cheaper sources of capital and much bigger bankrolls. So we're going to go out there, we're going to start, gobbling up our own fiber platforms, and we're going to form another euNetworks of Europe and another Zayo of the US. And all of a sudden, what you were doing and what I was doing in prosecuting our communication infrastructure business and with infrastructure and looking for assets to acquire at what in hindsight proved to be really good valuations, that became, at least from my vantage point, increasingly harder. And in Europe, maybe even more so, because it seemed like the quantity of infrastructure funds were focused on fiber relative to, the opportunity set was more intense in Europe than it was even in the U.S. Is that how things were looking from your perspective as well?
I think that you see when the tower companies came flying over into the bandwidth space, that bit never played out. And, as you and I first discussed in the year 2000, it's not the United States of Europe. It's not homogeneous. And so if you looked in terms of the fiber world, there was Colt, which was owned by Fidelity, yourselves, Eurofiber, which was predominantly a low countries business at that time, a very, very strong business, brilliantly well managed. And then you get these deals come up and then you love, again, fiber to the home and all the huge sums of money being thrown at that, which again, I don't understand. I don't understand how they make money. I don't understand any of that. And I just say to people, I do B2B. I don't understand that. And then you've got like huge deals down in Italy and Spain, but they might as well be Malaysia. It's so different. So we would go to Madrid, maybe Barcelona, maybe to Bilbao, but all we're doing is going in and out for data centers. So in terms, we'd have people coming round all the time, but they never really understood what we did. Even though we would tell them exactly what we did, but every time you know how it is. So this is exactly what we do. They must be hiding something.
Stonepeak was one of the big infrastructure funds that were looking to put lots of money to work, and they come and work a deal with you guys. So tell us about, and Neil, let's come back to that and let's kind of catch up, because Neil's on your board, but Neil, you're also doing other stuff with Columbia Capital. Yeah. And other stuff with some of our kind of colleagues that were with us during that transformation at level 3. So what was going on with you at that point?
I was very lucky, Dan, like anything. And I left level 3, wasn't sure what I was going to do. You two guys had worked with Siegel really closely. He had a high regard for you, for both of you, for some weird reason.
Yeah, poor judgment.
I know. Or even worse, you both said decent things about me. So he came along and he did his business. He was invested in Presidio. It was part of a business. It was doing really badly. It was based in Atlanta. Remember, I was traveling all over the place for a long, long time. I was getting tired of it. He said, look, this business is based in Atlanta. It's not doing well. Can you fix it? It didn't take me long. I fixed it pretty easily. It was all the basic things that needed to be fixed. Product set, customer base, customer service, people, all the stuff that I like doing. So fixed that. Then they asked me to join a few other things, a few other boards. One of the other boards I joined was Grant Van Rooyen's board at Cologix. And that's where Stonepeak comes in, because Grant decided he wanted to sell Cologix, obviously, realize some rewards from that business that he had built. And we didn't even know who Cologix was, who Stonepeak were, 15 months before we started the process. And then they got actively involved in the process and ended up being the successful bidder.
So just to put the name Grant Van Rooyen in perspective, and the name you mentioned earlier, Jeff Tench. Now, you brought Jeff on board to help with Presidio, if my memory's correct.
No, I brought him on board to help with another video call company, and then him and I built a company that was a Microsoft reseller for cloud services.
Okay.
And Jeff ran that, and I was chairman of that one. We sold that as well, made great returns on it.
So you do the Presidio, working with John Siegel in particular at Columbia.
Yeah.
Kind of get that on the right track, have a really successful outcome there.
Yeah.
Continue to work with Columbia and bring Jeff Tench, who, when I was, in the earlier story, we were collaborating together. Yeah. Jeff was part of my team and kind of a role model for how, someone that in the mid-level of a product group works with the sales organization. So you bring him on board. And then there's Grant. Grant was also part of my organization when I was there. If I remember right, he was heading up either the data co-location business or internet.
That was
maybe both.
International. Yeah. It worked for Brady. Both of them we sent across to Brady, if you remember. I don't know if that was when you were there, Dan, probably after. Yeah. We sent them both across to Brady to work for Brady in Europe to get them away from the madness of the States and level 3 and to get trained in proper leadership and management techniques.
Yep. So Grant then goes off and does Cologix. So he also partners with Columbia, through kind of the relationships that Brady I had with them. He does this Cologix play, which was, one defined around interconnect.
Yeah, in tier 2 markets. In tier 2 markets.
Another phenomenally successful outcome.
Phenomenal.
Big exit. So that's when Stonepeak comes in. So Stonepeak comes in, kind of gives the big exit to Cologix, continues to be a partner at that point with Columbia, because I don't think Columbia exited in full.
No, they didn't.
When they took Cologix.
They rolled forward. They've now exited, and about, let's call it 9 months, a year into the acquisition of Cologix, they approached Columbia and said, "You've got this other company we're interested in. Are you interested in selling?" And you can take over at that point, Brady, which we said, basically, here's the price.
I was working with a company, and I don't want to say their name because but the nuance is important. So when did we do that deal? I think 2018.
Yeah. Started it in
all of 17. And that was just me, Jennifer Smith, who's my head of M&A, who then became CFO, and Will Peters from Barclays. We're the only people on the team. Because again, GVR have been in my ear. Don't let Siegel near this. Don't let anybody near it. Just control everything yourself. And knowing Grant as you do, you find that hard to believe. So I wouldn't let them.
That's sarcasm for those who don't know Brady.
It's all well, Caruso. You're both control freaks.
We're all control freaks.
we are just working it non-stop. And I'm working this specific guy for fun, and we got to the valuation. They don't believe the number, but I told them it's the number, and I told them 4 times every year. And the first time they just laughed. They come back a year later, and it was the number. It's just still the same number. And eventually they said so. But we got down to the end of it, and you know what this is like, Dan, which is why you must never fall in love with a deal. You just got to stay focused on the prize and don't think about what the outcomes are, because the outcomes for people who have been working with me in a really hard environment for a long period of time were life-changing. Not least for me and Neil as well. So, we would. But this particular firm wanted management to roll 50% of their equity, and I wouldn't have it. I said, I'm not doing it. You have to do it. You need to understand that the partners have got their equity wrapped up in this venture, and they need to see you've got some skin in the game. And I'm like, I remember I was in a very exclusive private club in London having this meeting with the senior partner. It's like, you need to understand that. And by the way, no one will pay this price. If you want to sit down and talk about the relative skin in the game of the executive management team in the euNetworks and the partners of your business, I'm really happy to do that. But unless I've missed out on arithmetics, it's all of our net wealth and a very small proportion of yours. And I'm not prepared to go back to the guys and tell them, yeah, you've worked for the last 10, 12 years, and you need to leave this amount of money on the table. And then I said, and someone will pay the price. And I walked out. God, I really hope someone. But I was aware, I hadn't really had the conversation, but I was aware in the background.
And this is a firm that's different than Stone Peak you're talking about right now.
Yeah.
At this point, Stone Peak's not in the picture.
We were 8 months down the line, maybe 9 months. I mean, money had been spent. We're not far off paper in it. This was the last.
And you won't tell us who that was.
And importantly, we had been spending the money personally as well as if we were going to get it.
Yeah, so you're already spending habits that change.
Oh, did I say me there? It was me.
And so, Neil, since Brady won't tell us who that firm is, will you tell us?
No.
So right. So we got that bit, but I've been talking to Grant and John in the background, and you know that GVR is the master negotiator, and we spoke. I said, look, we're having different conversations. They're not going necessarily the way they want, but we need to move here, because they've got 8 months first mover advantage on you. So if you can go and you can do it in this time frame, and don't worry, we'll just use the paper that GVR's done, then we'll go. And, genuinely, I know you spoke to them at a later date in a much more complicated deal than ours. They did absolutely every single thing they said they were going to do.
And very quickly.
and quickly. And we got that deal done. It was a lovely valuation. And, you know, they were my partner up until a fortnight ago, and they generally never let me down. And
so they come in, buy not all of the equity, but a significant portion of it. Is that correct?
Yeah, they bought, I think, 67% of the business. And then my existing shareholders took a load off the table but rolled forward. So I think all of the existing shareholders, the ones who Neil Hobbs,
the consortium, all roll forward.
Yeah. Yep. And that's a big outcome, right? That's a big outcome for Columbia Capital, big outcome for the management team, the investors that were there before you got there. You know, the appreciation that they benefited was significant. You know, this was not a little win. This was a very big win. And then it kept going, though, too. How long did you stick with it, Brady? Another 3 or 4 years?
Another 4 years.
We did the trial last week or the week before.
Yeah, I've only just finished. So we that was another interesting conversation. Hi guys, yeah, we've done the deal. Just one thing, I probably should have checked with you before, but I've told the new guys that we'll stop around for another 5 years. You need to go and talk to my wife, my husband, my partner. So we went again, and like as I say, 2 Tuesdays ago, we sold the company again, where Stonepeak and their consortium, APG, the Dutch pension fund, and IMCO of Canada, another pension fund, will co-own the business, and all of the other shareholders have exited. And I will be stepping down as, when are you publishing this?
Probably about a few weeks from now, about a month from now.
So
yes,
it's still a TBD date, but it's time for me to.
It won't leak from this.
No, I know. I think it's pretty open, but it's like everybody thinks it's a really good idea to take the CEO of 14 years and make them the chairman. It is the worst idea in the world. Because you've got to support what executive management think, but if they do something different than you were doing, by definition, you don't agree with it. So it's like, and by the way, that's not what Paul and the team did, but it's just, I loved euNetworks. I loved Level 3. I love BT. I love Comms. All these chapters need to close, and this one's just coming towards the end.
So my original investment there, if I would have just let it ride all the way till this last exit, I probably left a whole bunch of money on the table even though I think I made 5x on the investment. So
I thought you were still in. Did you take it all off the table at the last one?
Yeah.
Oh.
Sometime I did. I'm not sure when. I think it was when Stonepeak came in.
Okay.
So Brady, I got to ask you, and I don't know how well you remember this or not. I guess as you do, I include this in the book because it's part of the Zayo sale process when Stonepeak, the same Stonepeak that we've been talking about, is leading one of the consortiums that's trying to buy Zayo, and it turned out to be a complex consortium with a lot of different voices, but Stonepeak being kind of largely at the point. And so, Brian, who was really the only person that I knew at Stonepeak, was the one leading that. I don't know if Brian led the euNetworks one with you. And Cologix. Well, we went under an NDA with the rival bidder that went on for a period of time, but then it opened up and they had, in essence, one more window of opportunity because, we didn't renew the exclusive period because we're still a week or so away from getting a deal done, maybe 2 weeks. And so at that point, I was able to have conversations again with Brian and, started to take his phone calls and listen. But at some point, Neil calls me out of the blue And I think you were calling, if I remember right, talking on behalf of one of the senior partners at
and Trent Vici it was that called me.
Yeah, and you're saying, what's really going on here? What do we really need to do? And I think my message was as simple as pay the price that you said you're going to pay to begin with.
It was, it's funny as the background, because when they asked me, I said, look, I know Dan, he's a good friend, but I'll tell you what the answer is going to be, right? A, don't go behind his back, it won't work. And B, there's a price that he's got in mind, you're going to have to pay it. And if you've not got it, somebody else will have it. So out of courtesy to you, I'll ask him, but I'm telling you what it's going to be. And of course, that's exactly what happened, right?
Yeah.
Right? And their consortium broke down. And I think that was the problem. They were willing to pay the price, but other members of the consortium weren't.
That's exactly what happened. When did you do your deal with?
Let's see, we've been early 2019 when we signed the agreement. So call it in February.
19 PTC. So the Pacific Telecoms Council in Honolulu. It's a long way from London, but I tell you what, the weather's a lot better than it is in January in London. And I remember I was staying in Helkalani. You were probably there too. If you weren't there that year, you might as well have been, because the only thing anybody was talking about was that transaction.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting with Brian, and the problem with when you get these big consortium and you get a lot of these masters of the universe is they just all want to be heard.
Yeah.
And that Brian put his life and soul into doing that transaction. He absolutely, and he thought he could get it landed. He thought he could get it landed. He thought he could get it landed. But, you know, sometimes it's like herding cats. Like I say, this latest transaction that we did took 2 years and 9 months. It took me 2 years and 9 months. We spoke to nearly 300 people.
Yeah.
It's just hard, and you just got to just keep saying, no, this is the price. This is the price. This is the price.
And again, we didn't stop spending, so we were still spending as if we're doing it next quarter.
Again with the royal we.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, they had that window that opened up at the end, and I was, of course, hoping a little bit of a bidding war would develop. But if they would have taken the attitude that, you know, hey, show us the agreement we need to sign, there would have an agreement ready to be signed, and you know they could have taken the deal at the end, and you know they got stuck at 33.5. And by the time, I don't know, maybe they would have gone higher, but by the time they said 33.5, now they were within 3 days of signing. And I'm like, I'm just going to go get this signed, and they'll either figure it out or not. But we were exhausted at that point, and I just wanted to get it over with, and I didn't want it, to slip away.
But just like even at a much smaller level, Dan, it's the same thing. See, when we used to sell ultra low latency, and I know obviously you've been in the spread business, so you knew what that was like. And so selling bandwidth for traders where every single millisecond is incredibly important. We'd put out a new route sometimes, but we always knew that we were going to be able to get a quicker speed in a shorter period of time. So we'd put out speed, one of our competitors would put out another speed, and then we'd take the speed down. And we always knew that one of the big challenges was for that salesperson and that product manager to go back to their CFO and say, they've done it slower, we need more money. And I think you get a consortium together, you raise all of that money, going in front of investment committees is no fun. And to keep going back and say, this was going to be the price, but actually it needs to be this price, I actually think that that's where the deal fatigue comes from. Because at the end of the day, Dave Dorman told us something brilliant in concert, and it's always stayed with me. He said, Brady, there's never a deal that I lost on price that I wouldn't die in a ditch for 6 months later. Don't lose a deal on price. And it always stayed with me, that line. It's just...
Yet you were steadfast on the price you wanted. I was steadfast on the price that I wanted. And part of it is because if you give an inch, they could start taking more and more. Like, oh, you didn't really get the price. How low are you willing to go?
That was their fault, not your fault. That's the point.
Yeah, exactly. So, and Neil, let's kind of put a wrapper around your story. What have you been doing the last 2 or 3 years? Where are you at right now relative to your professional life?
I'm winding down, to be honest. I'm still, I've spent most of my career since I left Level 3 working with Columbia, working with John in particular, Jim and Patrick Hendy, which I love. I love those guys. I've learned a lot from them. They're great partners. They're great people to work with. As either on the board or chairman of a board or chief executive of a business, depending on what situation it was in. I've still on a few boards there. We sold Summit, which is a fiber play up in Northern Virginia to the data centers. Bill Cook's running that. He started another thing with Columbia. Bandwidth Infrastructure Group in California and in Atlanta. We're killing it. So learning a lot of that, just working with Charles Myers. We've got a little private equity firm that's invested in some, retail concepts. I'm doing that, but largely I've been very fortunate. I've had some really nice exits along the way. I built a farm in Northern Georgia. I go there a lot. Just having a good time, keep my hand in, Dan, but my days of running anything are long gone. Long gone.
Gotcha.
That's a young man's game, I think.
Yeah, I'm with you. When I stopped there, I'm like, I'm not running anything anymore. Done with it, and yet very active. What about you, Brady? How are you thinking about your next couple of years, your next few years?
Play golf, drink red wine, smoke cigars.
Well, I got a place where you can do all those things, and you can bring Neil along with you. So if I could somehow twist your guys' arms to come out to Cabo, I've got a place in this area called El Dorado, which is about as interesting a place to go smoke cigars, drink wine, and play golf as there is in the world. So we'd love to.
Sounds like a deal. We're there.
Sounds like a
all right.
Bud.
Let's figure that out. And then as you reflect back on, as I reflect back on my career, and obviously, putting this book together gives you that much more reason to reflect back. I don't think things would have played out for me the way they did had it not been those 2 years that we spent together right before I left Level 3. And perhaps in some ways, it's not clear what kind of relationships you guys may have developed with Columbia Capital or to do euNetworks in your case, Brady, had not been for the continuation of our relationship. So in many ways, I view kind of our trajectory interlinked, and maybe John Siegel's in particular interlinked with us, and we're all better off for it. So thank you for being that important part of my life and part of the most exciting periods of my journey in the world of bandwidth.
Right back at you.
No,
we couldn't have done anything without you, Dan.
Yeah, you're very kind to say that, Dan. I know we loved our time with you. You should have took us on the Zeo board. You'd have made even more money if that's possible.
A lot more.
But in seriousness, it's been a great time. I think the foundation of Columbia with all of us was great as well. It's we need to get together at some point and celebrate the sort of successes we've had, and also the failures, because we've all failed in things too. But thanks for
anything but a steady path of glory. It was. It sounded like this in the podcast, but where we could spend the whole podcast talking about how hard it was and
things we failed.
How horrible was stuff we did along the way at times that made all of our lives more difficult from a professional standpoint. So cool. Thank you guys, and I will be sending you an email to figure out when we could get together in person.
Cheers, buddy.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for your time. And it's a brilliant book.
Well, thank you.
Good book.
Appreciate it.
Cheers, bud.
All right, take care, guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Bear Roars. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe on your listening platform. This podcast was produced by Loud Bear Productions and edited by Courtney Caruso with support from Kendall Weinberg, Emily Reed, and Gibson Siegert.